Hi, this is Renee, and I want to do a video, not just a video that's shared in short clips on Instagram stories, which is what I've been doing, but like a video segment that you watch in its entirety. I want to do a video about authority, our relationship with authority, and authoritarianism, and I want to talk about my own. I'm going to be talking about my own tensions and relationships with authority. I keep pounding the drum that context is everything, and personal experience is almost everything. Like people's personal experience is their reality, and that's actually. There's words for that, theories and words for that I'm not going to get into in this video, okay? This video, I'm going to keep it on the subject of authority, my own experience with authority, and how it relates to the issue at hand with regards to the Freedom Convoy and protests against vaccine mandates. And I'm going to keep this video and my conversational tone here non-sassy, non-spicy, non-sarcastic, measured and reasoned, because I want people to be able to watch this without me turning them off with either kind of out of left field stuff, because I've shared out of left field stuff, and because I'm actually open to people's experiences and hearing what they have to say. Like, it's okay for me. Other people can be very dismissive of like stuff that's just kind of outside the edges a bit. They're just like, throw that whole thing out. I'm not going to have anything to do with that. That's fine. But because I'm aware of people's orientation that way, and also that if I get too one way in how I present, people will actually dismiss the whole argument, which is an interesting critique of engagement in general, but I understand. So all that to say, this is going to be like very, I'm not going to swear. I'm not going to be sarcastic. This is just going to be straight up honest sharing. And I am a memoirist in my writing. So that is how I've written for years. I share my own personal story. That's just how it is. And so that's going to be a big part of this. And then I'm going to ask some questions. So I want to start by with my own positionality here, and my own, like, I have to position myself in this story. I have a strong need for security. Like more so than, let's say, my husband, other people I know. Like some people are just really wired for security, and depending on what kind of things you believe or don't believe about personality tests and understanding people's personalities, like you will give credence to this or not credence, whatever. I'm telling you from my experience, I'm wired for security. And if you're into the Enneagram, I'm an Enneagram type 6, and when I learned that about myself, it was amazing insight for me, because I'm like, wow, that explains a lot of things, of the decisions I've made and my motivations for things. So security is really important to me. And I will freely give myself over to authorities in order to garner that security. I'll go into that a little bit in a minute, but on the other side of that, I think as an antidote within myself to that really strong security-seeking part of myself, on the other side of that, I feel what's inside of me is also an anti-authority streak, an anti-authority kind of protection mechanism for me. And I have been super grateful for that over the years, because it has helped counter some of that tendency I have to just give myself over to an authority for the sake of security. So I both am actively looking to the authorities in my life that I can trust and that will bring me security in my relationship with them, or in my compliance with their how they think I should live. I'm actively looking for that. And I'm also questioning authority all the time. These are things that exist in me at the same time. And these different parts of myself come out at different times. And I'm going to be interested to see where I land when I'm an elder and an older, much wiser, hopefully, person, about how that settles out in me. I'm curious to see. But that's a ways off. All that wisdom and eldership. So, but for example, just my parents could absolutely attest to my question authority streak and my just really not anti-authority, but just that like question the authority here in my teen years. Like I was a rebellious teenager. There was a time, and lots of people are. So that's not like some kind of unique thing, but that was definitely a part of the expression of that question. And did I ever question them? So that's just, these things, they come up in me at different times. That's just illustration. I'm going to share a very quick story here of how me seeking security and putting my trust in authority for the sake of security led me astray in recent years. And really, you have to go back to my writing and my years of writing to see that story play out, because it was something that played out in my marriage. And it's I'm like, I don't even know if I can summarize this in a short time, but I'm going to try. I had wrong and false ideas about authority within marriage that I was given from my religious culture and background. And that was that it was this idea of husband as authority and wife as kind of follower. And this was like, just to summarize it very quickly, that was the idea. And because I am a person who's looking for security and is looking for that by being able to trust authority and say, well, this person is gonna ensure my security. Like I did that in my marriage. And this is, just to be very clear here, this is not a domineering husband situation. This is not my husband who was like, I'm the authority and you have to follow. This was me saying, here's the paradigm I've been given, and it's going to lead me in a good path because I'm going to feel secure. Things are going to go well for me. And literally, you can go back to my writing and you can see that all. I've talked about it. I'm not making up these words now. Like it's all been documented. So it was me and my internalized ideas about how I was going to gain security in my life by just following along and being like, well, whatever my husband thinks is good, we're going to do that because that's going to bring security to me. And it did not. Okay? We're going to skip ahead. It did not. And it hurt our marriage because my husband wasn't asking for me to do that. It hurt our relationship. We have recovered from that and we are in a very good space. And I can share all this from a recovered place. But it hurt a lot of things in our lives. I just wanted to know I was going to be okay, that things were going to be okay. And if I followed and if I did what this trusted authority in my life thought was good for our family, good for him, good for me, it was going to be good because I could trust this person, and I trusted this person like implicitly, right? Like, this is a person I trust with my life. That is a very vulnerable story to share. I've shared it in my writing, so it's not like this is new. That's very vulnerable for me because people will be like, well, you should have never done that. Duh. Like, people can be really mean. You were raised in a bad religion, whatever. Like, whatever the thing is that you are like, well, that was obviously misguided. Bingo. Yes, it was. It was misguided of me. It was what I was doing at the time to seek the security that I needed in my life. The end result of that for me was a complete deconstruction of my religious construct. Okay, I took apart my faith. I took apart my beliefs. I took apart all kinds of things that were associated with my faith, which is I'm a Christian. And I'm still a Christian, still came out the other end a Christian, but a Christian with very different ideas of the authority of the Bible, the authority of many things. And that's just an example for you of a very real lived experience that I've had in which I have learned to be critical of my own desire and strong need to look to outside authority and experts to tell me what to do so that I can be secure and just follow that path and be okay. And if you know anything about like Enneagram stuff, and if you know anything about type 6, this will you'll be like, oh yeah, that makes sense. But you don't have to like subscribe to that or whatever. I'm just telling you, this is my story. Okay, so I have that experience, and that deeply impacted and affected me and has changed how I look at things and has enabled me, has caused me to be very self-critical of that tendency in myself, and to look at when I'm doing that, and the whole like looking to authority for security, look at when I'm doing that and to critique and ask questions about that. And because you simply cannot flat out trust authority just because they say you should, or because you think that it's going to take you down a secure path. Like you have to apply critical thinking to it. And this is a thing that I learned personally. Okay. So that's just to tell you one of my personal stories of my relationship with authority, trust, security, and to illustrate my own desire for security and the lengths that I will go to try to secure that. And yeah, and then the learning that I did in that process. And you have to know all that as I'm sharing what I'm sharing with regards to Freedom Convoy and opposition to vaccine mandates. You have to know somebody's experience. You have to know their positionality, their context, and that is mine. So now I have another story for you. This is a story that is shameful for me to share, and it shows a pettiness and vindictiveness in my own self that I am ashamed of, but I'm going to share it. At the very beginning of the pandemic, our family left Montreal because there was a lockdown, like stay-at-home orders, and the city was like getting shut down as things were happening like this all over the world. And our family went to Nova Scotia to stay with my parents. And we were going to shelter in place there. And it was like great fun, right? For the beginning, For me, it was like, yay, the world has stopped for a while. We can all just relax and breathe. Of course, then came and became something different from that, but that's what the energy was like at the beginning. So one of the things we do when we go to Nova Scotia is we always go to the beach, because that's an amazing thing of Nova Scotia. Just the beaches are amazing and they're so accessible, and there's very few people on them. There's very few people in Nova Scotia. So that's probably changing. That has been changing over the pandemic, because people have been leaving Ontario and other places and being like, let's get out of here. We're going to Nova Scotia. But yeah. The beach is one of the things I love about going to Nova Scotia. But one of the orders that was put in place by the government during the unknown phase, the like, what are we dealing with? We don't know what we're dealing with, was that all of the beaches, all of the public parks, all the municipal parks, any place you could go outside where you might come in contact with other people, I guess, those were all closed. And of course, I don't know where it's like where you live, but I mean, if we were in Montreal, that was when the yellow tape was all around the play structures. It was like we didn't know what we were dealing with, and we're like, we cannot risk interacting with people at all. In hindsight, this looks ridiculous now, but you don't know what you're dealing with, and it requires a certain type of action. I don't think it required that level of action, but that's hindsight, right? So the beaches were shut down in Nova Scotia, and you couldn't go to them. And while we were in Nova Scotia visiting my parents, my parents shared the story of one of their personal friends who took his family to the beach, and they were observed by the local police force, and they were fined. And we were sitting around supper talking about this. We had supper together every night and around the table. And the first thing out of my lips was, well, that serves him right. This is like a friend of my parents. And I was so intent on like everyone following the rules, because we didn't know. We didn't know what we were dealing with. And that it was fair. Like, it had to be fair for everyone. And if I couldn't go to the beach, because I was really ripped off. Here I was in Nova Scotia, and I loved going to the beach. And in the whole 6 weeks we were there, we never went to the beach. They never opened. We couldn't go to the beach. And I was pissed off. I said I wouldn't swear in this, but I was upset that I couldn't go to the beach. And this guy had taken his family to the beach this was like, everything was closed. Schools were closed. Businesses were closed. And he was fined. And I said, serves him right. He needs to follow the rules. Because I have a strong sense of justice and fairness and equity, and like equality and equity and quality are not the same thing. I'm not going to get into that here, but like a strong sense of like, these rules must apply to everyone, and they must apply equally, which is actually not equity, but that's for another conversation. And I felt bad about that, like almost the moment that it came out of my mouth later when I was reflecting on it, and I have felt bad about it since. Because, like, you have to understand the context here. Nova Scotia has like less, I think they just got to 1 million people. So we're talking about a population less than the Montreal metropolis area in a whole big piece of land. There's like 17 people per square kilometer. I looked that up for my American people. They're going to have no idea what that is, but whatever. 17 people per square kilometer. You could literally tell it I don't know about literally, okay, but you could tell all Nova Scotians to head to their local beach, or to like disperse amongst the beaches. You know, all of Halifax can't go to the local beach. You're going to have too many people. But you could tell everyone, go outside, go to your local beach, go to your local park, go to your whatever. And there would not be, there is so much space that you wouldn't come even in contact with the people. Like, you literally couldn't pass whatever disease you had over to them. And of course, at the time, we didn't know what we were dealing with. But it's an illustration of how, is it controlled by fear, or is it, fear of the unknown? You're so like, we don't know what we're dealing with. We can't have these things happen, even though if they were to happen in the case of Nova Scotia, okay? I'm not talking about other places with high density populations. Like maybe it isn't safe to send all the kids to the playground where they're going to interact. But in the case of Nova Scotia, where if you go to the beaches, and if everyone goes outside and goes to their municipal parks and is out walking, like you're not going to be bumping up against people. There's just too much space. And it just illustrates that there was a non-critical thinking lens. Basically, it was like we don't know what this is. We must make like a rule that really makes no sense given the population of the province and given the amount of land and free space and like that people can go into. It actually makes no sense. The point is, that was just one of many mandates, edicts, government saying you got to do this because we don't really know what to do, so you're going to do this. That actually, given the context, doesn't make sense. It might have made sense other places, but it didn't make sense to that context. And the problem is that when you start doing that a bunch of times as an authority, as a state, as a government, where you keep saying stuff that like doesn't make sense, it becomes, I don't want to say suspicious, but just like it just doesn't make sense. And you have to ask yourself, where is the reasons and the justification for this? Okay, so that's that story. During the pandemic, the government and the media have not been asking citizens to use critical thinking skills, probably because maybe people don't have enough of them, but I lean towards the side of trusting that people can think critically for themselves, and we have to keep encouraging them to do so. That is my bias and bent. It's not that the masses of people are stupid and we have to tell them what to do, but that the masses have to be able to be trusted with their lives, because otherwise, what you get is like an authoritarian state. So during the pandemic, it's been a trust us, we know what's best for you. Trust us, trust the science, trust the messaging that we're giving you. There is no messaging that I've seen, maybe you have and you can point it out to me, where it's not been, we want you to evaluate things and then make decisions. It's been, we have evaluated things and we are making the decisions for you. That has a place and a time in liberal democracy, in a very, I would say, quite a narrow window of circumstances in which that is acceptable. Like when you are in a really heightened state of emergency where people can't be making the decisions for themselves because they don't know what they're dealing with. So we just, in that case, we have to have like an authority help us through that. But that's been going on now for 2 years. And it's been a constant, we know what's best, even though the messaging has shifted and changed, and that's confusing for people. It's very confusing. We know what's best for you, and just follow us, just trust us, just do this. And also, what has felt like to me, don't ask too many questions. Like, don't ask questions around this. And even the media, I do not believe journalists have been doing their job in questioning things. There was a Denmark newspaper that has issued a formal apology for not doing their job as journalists in questioning the data and the stories and what have you given to them by the government. They said, as journalists, our job is to dig into these things and not just be like, the government says, therefore we publish. In a democracy, media doesn't do that. In totalitarian and authoritarian states, that's what the media does. They take the message straight from the government and just be like, oh, and here's what the state says. So there has been no calls to question or rooms for questioning or any kind of like, we want you to think critically about this. It's been, we're going to tell you what to do. And lots of people, by the looks of it, have been okay with that because it gives them a sense of security. It gives them a sense of someone knows what's going on. And if we just trust these authorities, we're going to be secure. It's going to be okay. They have this figured out. I don't have to figure this out. And truly, how can you? Like, there's just so much information to wade through and studies and data and perspectives. So most of us just don't have the capacity for that either. And that is also why we elect, people to make decisions for us. So there's like value in that, but there's also a point in which you should question state authority. This is where this is going. I'm going to come back to that later. But if you're not regularly even questioning that in your own life, with your relationship with, in your involvement in politics, and that if you're not regularly questioning and asking questions about the validity of what your government is doing, and you might come to the conclusion that, yeah, okay, this is valid. This action, this law, that's fine. But if you aren't regularly questioning that, that's a thing I think to be concerned about, just in general, because it concerns me abdicating your critical thinking skills for just following a government and hoping that you can trust what they're doing for you all the time. In January, some northern communities, native communities, kind of locked down their citizens or their community members because the threat of COVID, like infections in those communities and what it can do to those communities, it does have very negative effects on the health of those populations, because they don't have the access to the food, the good, all the things, the social determinants of health. That's what it is. Okay, I'm getting there. Their social determinants of health are lower, and that is a stain in Canada, and it is a blight in our country, and it must be addressed. That this situation exists. So these northern native communities and reservations are at a high risk for, or the risk is higher for the negative outcomes if COVID comes into those communities. So they have had lockdowns, hard lockdowns on people in those communities, where people are not allowed to leave, or maybe they're allowed to leave but not come back in. I mean, that just brings up so much to me. It's like we're applying Band-Aids to gaping wounds in our society. What we need to do is we need to deal with the social determinants of health there, right? But we're not in that place. We're just don't leave, don't come back in, okay? So this happened in January and other points during the pandemic, but this was in Manitoba, in the province of Manitoba. The residents of that community were not allowed to leave, and they were not, I think it was leave, or they weren't allowed to come back in, but there was like hard restrictions around their movement for all the reasons that I just explained. But the supplies of groceries that were coming into the community, and the food and the necessary things for life that were coming into the community were slow or lagging. I'm going to direct you to the actual stories on this after. I'll leave links, but there was problems. So they were running out of supplies. And so some mothers, as mothers do, some mothers left the community to go get groceries and diapers for their children because they could not get them in the community. The mechanisms by which those were supposed to happen were not happening, and they were running out of like necessities for their families. They left, they did their shopping, they came back, and as they were coming back into their community, which was barricaded, literally these are lockdowns, okay? So barricaded, as they come back in, they're given fines, $5,000 fines for taking this action for the sake of their families. And so why did those essentially border guard type people, why did the people that were at the gates of the community letting people back in fine? Because that's what they had been told to do. There's not a thinking through the this is a crisis. People aren't getting food. We need to do something. People have to take things into their own hands. Mothers taking things into their own hands. And the unthinking response, this is what I'm trying to get at here. The non-critical response is, as they're coming back, slap a fine. That's the response. And so there's newspaper articles about this, and these women are on government assistance to feed their children and waiting for the checks they get from the government to buy this stuff for their kids, and then they're being fined. It is this kind of thing, these kind of actions around this whole pandemic issue that give me great pause, because it shows the unthinkingness, the institutions over individuals, the policy over people mentality that people get into when there's these government edicts, mandates, and you're just like, that's what we got to do. That's what we got to do. That's what we got to do. You're not doing that. Boom. The lack of questioning around this, the lack of criticality is very concerning to me. Now I'm going to share one more story experience kind of perspective thing, and then I'm going to end with a few questions. Thanks for staying with me this long if you've been here. I read an article this week because I've been reading so many things. I've just never read so much stuff related to news and politics and what have you in 1 week in my life. I read an article, I think it was in the National Post. It was a guy, I guess journalist, reporter, maybe he's just a commentary person, I'm not sure. Felt like he was a journalist, and he went to the Toronto rallies, because there's been these now freedom rallies and freedom protests all over the country. He went to the Toronto one, and he was reporting on the kind of people that he saw there and just the experience. And one of the things that he pointed out was the large contingent relative to the population of people at the protest, and also relative to the population with the national population, okay, the large contingent of Eastern Europeans that were there. So to remind you, Eastern Europeans, you should already know this, have dealt with their share of authoritarian and totalitarian government regimes. I'm not saying our government is a regime. I'm saying that is their personal experience. They have lived through that. They have experienced that firsthand. And they are coming out to these rallies and to these protests to say, we are against these vaccine mandates. And I would say they have a very valid life experience from which to draw upon that would make them question what's going on in Canada. I saw these people myself when I was at the rally in Ottawa 2 weekends ago. And there is a large concern within that community of where our government is headed and how our government has treated its citizens and the kind of rhetoric that has gone around this. And these people are sounding an alarm. And I think that's something that we should pay attention to and something that we need to be honest about. I'm going to wrap this up with some questions for you. After I've shared my story, I've shared my own vulnerabilities, I've shared my own experience with learning to question authority, and my own struggles with really wanting to trust authority to take care of my security and my okayness. And then this thing inside me that's like stands up almost to protect me against the way I can just be very uncritical in that other space and not thinking. So yeah, I've shared these things. I've shared other stories. I've sharing some things I'm observing, and now I've got some questions for you. Some people say, well, authoritarianism just couldn't happen in Canada. Like that's not how we are here. All of what's going on is perfectly reasonable. It's necessary. It's necessary for the security of the country. It's necessary for our healthcare system. It's the science says. So I know, like I've heard it. It's people are like, these things are necessary, and what these other people are concerned about, that just can't happen. It's just not going to happen here. What would have to happen in society, in Canadian society, for that slip over the edge not to happen? And you might say, well, people wouldn't allow it. Like, I wouldn't allow it. Like, we would not allow it. And I would point you directly then to the trucker convoy, the freedom rallies, and the blockades across the country and say, I agree. People wouldn't allow it. That is what these people are doing. They're saying, we can't allow this. So that's one question I have for you. Other people might say, well, I'd recognize unjust use of authority and unthinking, uncritical mandates when I saw it. Like, I would see it. Like, it would be obvious to me. And my question there is, okay, what metrics would you use to evaluate that? So how would it be obvious to you? And what would you be looking at to evaluate if a state authority had overstepped and if they were being unjust? What would those metrics be for you? Would it be science? That's used a lot. Like, they're like, well, science would be my metric. And I just want to remind you that science and the use of science by our government in the past has justified horrible things being done to people. Like these things happened in residential schools, certainly like in the last century, and I don't even know into how how recently these things have been going on. Well, I do know that residential schools have existed up until like just 1996 or something. But like literally the government did experiments on Indigenous children in residential schools with relation to nutrition and their diets in the name of science. And that was okay because the science justified it. How do you know when you are on the right side of state authority? I don't know. I can't answer that for you. But how do you know when you are on the right side, or a side that you're okay aligning yourself with? Is it based on like, well, the majority is there? Like, so if the majority is there, then that must be the right side. So the idea that like, if you're on the side of the majority, you're in the right. That is an idea that like all through history and recent history, you can't use that as your metric. That, well, if the majority says this is okay, it must be right. A critical thinking lens would tell you otherwise. And I'm also curious, under what conditions are you okay with state authority telling people what to inject into their bodies? How serious does the threat to overall society have to be for that to be okay for you? And I guess if you are for the current vaccine mandates, you feel like the threat to society of COVID-19 has justified the state telling people what they should put in their bodies. You're like, yes, COVID-19 is enough of a threat to our society that it justifies these. I'm curious then when it wouldn't be justified for you, if ever. So for those of you who are okay with mandates that require a vaccine, that require people to be vaccinated or lose their employment, to be vaccinated or lose access to seeing their children who are not in sole custody. This is happening now in Canada, where unvaccinated parents are losing access to visit with their children, and many other rights that people have are being taken away from them. Not privileges. I'm not talking here about going out for supper. I'm wondering, when is that not okay for you? Like at what point would that not be okay? And then related is, when is a government unjust in exercising authority over individual autonomy? And what are those thresholds for you? I really feel like people have to ask themselves these questions as they are looking at these vaccine mandates and making a decision of whether they are for them or against them or somewhere in between. Like you have to question your own relationship with authority, your relationship with your thoughts about when government or state authority imposes its will on bodily autonomy, like when that's okay for you and when it's not okay for you. That's the end of this video. I think what I'll do is I'll put those questions in the caption of this, just as because I might not have articulated them very well here in the video, so I'll put them in the captions. Yeah, that's some thinking that I have on authoritarianism, and the criticality that we have to apply to this in our own lives. And yeah, the honest questions we have to ask ourselves. Thanks for watching.